If you're wondering who McKinsey is and why they've agreed to pay $650 million as part of an opioid settlement after charges were brought by them, by the U.S. Attorney's Office, both in Massachusetts and the Western District of New York, well, you've arrived at the right place. So let's get into it. Who is McKinsey? Or what is it, should we say? McKinsey is basically one of the premier consulting firms in the world, right? And their goals are essentially to maximize profits for companies and encourage efficiency. Their clients include Fortune 500 companies, local governments, state governments, foreign governments, international corporations. It runs the gamut. But they're very good at what they do. But remember, the key is their job is to maximize shareholder profits, right? That's what companies hire them for. How do we cut out the fluff and make more money? But what happens in the process often has very dire consequences. The book I would suggest you read is this. It's called When McKinsey Comes to Town. It's well worth it. It's eye-opening. It talks about the different companies and corporations that if McKinsey comes to your town and takes over the local plant or the local business that basically makes the town thrive, that many people work there, whether they work on the line, whether they work as janitors, whether they work as administrative staff. When McKinsey comes to town, certain things happen. So McKinsey had this client called Purdue Pharma. And if you haven't heard of Purdue Pharma, this is the pharmaceutical company run by the Sackler family. Those same Sackler family members who perpetrated fraud on both the FDA and basically the entire physician population and the civilian population of the United States of America and created an entire generation of drug addicts. They paid McKinsey $93 million over a 15-year period to do what? Turbocharge sales. What does turbocharge mean? Maximize the prescriptions. So Purdue hired McKinsey to figure out, how do we maximize the amount of prescriptions for OxyContin so our sales prices go through the roof? To maximize profits. And how are they going to do that? So they said, okay, we're going to come into Purdue and we're going to look at all your documentation and see who are the prescribers that prescribe the most. And what they found was this. They identified a number of small clinics that were writing more opioid prescriptions than the entire hospital systems. Do you know what McKinsey told Purdue to do? Go to those small clinics who are overwriting these prescriptions for opioids. Which, to be honest, we're going to have a separate conversation about Purdue because I cannot do it in 10 minutes about how OxyContin was marketed as basically a miracle drug, an opioid that you could, this is what they sold, this is the pharma rep sold to prescribers, physicians, that your patients are not going to get addicted to drugs because we have a time release on it. And what they knew, and we all knew, was that the time release didn't matter because, as anyone who was addicted to OxyContin, including me, you just lick off the time release, spit it out, and then eat it or crush it up and snort it. This they all knew, like for years. And not only did they continue to try to prescribe it, push more prescriptions, they wanted to up the dose. They wanted to go from 20s to 40s to 80s to 160s milligrams. Created literally a generation of addicts. Another part of their strategy was effectively to lobby like politicians, right? To create legislation so that OxyContin's benefits were considered in the level of opioids that the benefits outweighed the risks, which basically means that it was a lower regulated class of opioids, which meant that prescribers, doctors, did not have to go to training about how to prescribe. It wasn't mandatory. It was optional. What else do? They go on ride-alongs with the pharma rep. So they say, okay, let's take me to a doctor's office, take me to a pharmacy. And one note after such visit, a McKinsey rep said, abuse is definitely a huge issue. After the pharmacist that they visited was shaking while he was talking to them and had a gun because he'd been robbed so many times. And for anybody else who grew up in the early 2000s, pharmacies were being robbed violently, aggressively, all the time for OxyContin. So not only were they creating a nation of addicts, but those addicts were then robbing and stealing and harming people because their addiction was so severe. In 2018, after Massachusetts sued Purdue over the marketing of opioids, two of the partners from McKinsey had a discussion about how they were going to handle it. Their email said, quote, "It probably makes sense to have a quick conversations with the risk committee to see if we should be doing anything, ... other than not included, eliminating all of our documents and emails." One of the executives, his last name is Allen, then emails himself to delete old Purdue documents from laptop. In the meantime, they've settled hundreds of lawsuits against them, both domestically and internationally. They've settled them all. They've paid billions of dollars. But as a lawyer, what often happens when you settle is you say, "Oh, we don't take any liability on. We're just going to settle for the best interest of the parties." But this is the first one. They have to admit what they did. Let me read you their statement. "We are deeply sorry for our past client service to Purdue Pharma and the actions of a former partner who deleted documents related to his work for that client. We should have appreciated the harm opioids were causing in our society, and we should not have taken under sales and marketing work for Purdue Pharma. This terrible public health crisis and our past work for opioid manufacturers will always be a source of profound regret for our firm." I mean, that's a crock of shit. We should have appreciated the harms? No. How about, "I'm sorry, I'm the CEO now. We did it. It is clear from our records and what we have seen through all this litigation is that partners and CEOs who came before me did know, and they engaged in bad faith in order to make profits for shareholders over the American public. They knew things were unsafe and they chose to do it anyway. And for that, we profoundly regret." Not, "Oh, we should have known." Should have known. You did know. You're admitting you knew. You did know. And do you know what they're being paid for now? New York City, do you remember in July when Eric Adams came out and rolled out the trash bins because he paid $1.6 million? New York City paid $1.6 million to McKinsey to figure out the trash problem. You know what they decided? Trash is better in bins than in the bags on the sidewalk. And people are wondering why we're like ready for a revolution.